Hey everyone, thanks for tuning back into Fishing for Men. This is Brandon here, and in the room with me today I have Cody.
Hello.
Spencer.
Howdy.
And Billy.
Hey y'all.
Hey, so before we dive into the episode, I just wanted to ask everyone a quick question. I wanted to see if anyone could share something from this week that made you feel grateful or hopeful about life.
Ooh, I actually have a lot today to talk about that, which is kind of fun.
Go for it.
First one started with the counseling session today.
Oh, you had counseling?
Yeah.
Nice.
Great way just to get it all out of the body.
Absolutely.
It's weird that this was encouraging, but I was telling him just about the foster journey and everything that's going on. There's like 8,000 emotions hidden inside. And he looks at me and he goes, you know, I'm trying really hard to empathize with you right now, but I just got nothing. He's like, I don't know how to deal with what you're dealing, go through. I haven't had to deal with that. And so I was like, I get it. But it, for whatever reason, it was just validated all the stuff that I'm feeling inside. And then honestly, super simple, riding to students tonight in my truck with windows down, just blaring some country gospel music and hanging out in the car.
Having a good time.
Yeah. So
Sounds perfect.
I'm going to sound like copy and paste, but this week I had one of my first actual sessions with a counselor. Been thinking about it for a long time. Had this guy that I wanted to try and get in and see just because he came recommended, and he was faith-based, and reached out last month, asked if he was taking new clients. He said he was, so had one with him. It was really, really great, really good dude so far. And just having somebody that can kind of put words to what I've been feeling is just okay. Now that I know what it is, I can put a plan together to try and tackle it. And this weather that we're getting right now has been this is my weather that I'm built for. I don't like extreme hot. I'd rather have cold before this, but this is perfect.
And listeners in the future, we're coming to you from February, first week of February, which in Texas, the fact that it's, what was it today? 71, 72?
Yeah, perfect.
Just wonderful outside.
We had snow this time last year.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, very cool. So,
what about you? Wait, hold on.
Wait, what? No.
Do you have something you're grateful for, Brandon?
Nothing.
Almost got
Zero. No, just kidding.
I just get to ask the question.
Yeah.
I thought that was the gig when you're the host. You don't have to answer any of the questions. You just get to ask them all. This might sound cheesy, but I've been feeling very grateful for just the simple things in life this week. My family, to be one. I got to have lunch with a good friend yesterday who's just someone who is always there, has mentored me along the way, builds me up, encourages me. So yeah,
awesome.
Just appreciate friendships like that, including you guys.
Look at us.
Look at you guys.
Aw.
So that being the case,
we had the fancy soundboard where we could put the sound
we
in
need to
it.
put that on there too. Start taking notes.
That's our next soundboard, guys.
so if they're gonna force it on me like that, Cody, you got to go.
I'm left to go last, but just in general, a great week of being in touch with people. I got in contact with a couple of old friends, and conversations went really well. Just great to reconnect with some people and start some things, some new things. I'll just say
new ventures in life.
Yeah,
Cool.
Very cool.
So yeah, sounds like it was a good week for us guys.
I think so.
Yeah.
Good weather, good times.
I like this. I think we should start all these with this. The grateful start before we actually get into everything.
Because we were always bombing on how was your week.
Yeah.
We were like, nah.
We knocked it out of the park this week.
Okay, so diving right into the episode, today we're kicking off a new series called An Unexpected Coronation. So it's not super obvious from the title, but this is actually our Easter series. So since we're still releasing every other week, we got to back up quite a bit from Easter to clear the runway. So we're gonna be in this series for the next 4 weeks, leading up to Easter. What we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the story of Jesus' death and resurrection from probably a little bit different perspective than you're used to hearing. And on that note, this whole series itself is going to be a little bit different from all of the series that we've done so far. Same guys, same conversation, dialogue back and forth. But instead of looking at like a topic from how do you apply it to real life, this time we're going to be focused a little bit more on the Bible and kind of going in depth there. But I still think overall, besides it just being, I think the Bible is really cool and there's lots of cool things to learn out of it. I think it still really ties in well with what we're all about here at Fishing for Men, which our purpose is to help men find community and grow as disciples in Jesus. So what better way to grow as a disciple of Jesus than in his word? So
Absolutely.
let's get going. So before we actually get to Jesus and his story, I want to ask a couple of questions. When you think about Jesus' death on the cross, what thoughts or emotions come to mind?
I think this is going to sound strange, but I think I've been conditioned to see it as a happy thing when in reality, like that was a dark day. And trying to like remind myself of that a little bit of like, that was like a really, really dark day or potentially really sad day for a lot of people. And just trying to remember those emotions that are there. I feel like on this side of Jesus, we sometimes lose that. And it's like, yay, Jesus died.
Because we're singing "Oh Happy Day" right at church. So I know the Passion, that movie.
Yeah, that's
what pops into mind for me.
I've never actually watched that movie.
You haven't?
Wow. I have not.
Yeah, it's pretty gory.
That's what I hear. Lots of blood.
Yeah. That's painful to see.
Growing up, that movie came out when I was in high school, and we got extra credit to go see it.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't seen it yet. And some kid came in and he goes, "I don't want to ruin it, guys, but he dies in the end." And it was pretty inappropriate. He got kicked right out of class. But talking about the Passion.
Come on, he's a high school.
Like, oh my God. For me, honestly, it's like disappointment that it had to happen. Not disappointment in Christ, but when I think about it, it's almost like this self-frustration that it even had to happen.
What do you mean by self-frustration?
Like that I'm still doing things today that's why that had to happen.
Gotcha.
You know? So that's it. But then also like gratitude. Like I remember for a long time when I would pray, it was always like, "Thank you for giving me a gift that I'll never deserve." So there's always some gratitude to it, but I always just get that like, God, dang it. You know? Like there's just that feeling. I don't know the right word for the emotion.
Yeah.
But yeah.
yeah.
Stop doing the bad things, you idiot.
So, okay, now let's pretend like we were alive in Jesus's day. But let's say that you weren't there to witness any of this stuff. You just heard about it via word of mouth. Do you think you would have believed in this Jesus guy, that he was the Messiah?
I really want to say yes.
We know too much.
Yeah, right.
That would I think I'm going to cop out, okay, and say I think it'd be really difficult to say if I would or not because my mind's got all kinds of questions back to you, which is, am I still Gentile? Am I Jew? Like,
Right.
Where am I at? Like, if I'm Jewish, do I have all of the Hebrew scriptures like in my brain like they do? Do I have that context of I got to work back now out of all of that context, or am I Gentile?
Yeah. Yep. We know too much.
Well, let's stick with Jew. I'll narrow it down for you a little bit.
I think honestly, they had a hard time to unlearn a lot of things that they may have already developed, and so. Like I said, I would like to say yes. I don't know. I have no idea. I think it would be interesting to be in that time and hear about this guy because like that's all going around the towns of
You hear about this guy, right?
this dude just died on the cross. Like this is a big thing, and you're like yeah, right.
Again, so like for me, I think where I would get hung up is again, this is all on the assumption that I didn't get to witness any of it. I only
Yeah.
got to hear about it
Yeah.
secondhand or third hand. I think I would follow a lot of it until how I heard it ended.
Yeah.
And if I didn't get to see him like alive after he supposedly had died on the cross, because you got to imagine that there were his followers who said that he had risen from the dead and gone up to heaven. And then there were probably religious leaders that were like, no, they stole his body away at night.
Yeah.
And so there would have been these competing stories, and it would be like,
Oh yeah.
you know, who do I
I
believe?
don't think this would have been like a big climactic event like we
We make it to be
like
right.
this would have been like, oh,
Yeah,
this is the hearing of the three that are going up on the cross. Like this was I'm going to assume it's a fairly normal thing that people saw happen to the worst, in their case, the worst of the worst people.
It was like the terrorists of their day.
Yeah.
It was mostly zealots.
Which is wild to think that you're like, oh, here, another one.
That would be gruesome to see.
Yeah, oh my gosh.
I'd be Thomas the Doubter all day.
All day.
Yeah. Unfortunately. But yeah, I'd want to see it. And I'm prone to groupthink. If I was myself today and you just transported me and I'm prone to like go with what the group's saying, yeah, I'd struggle.
You think there were people that were just so busy with work and stuff like that that they just didn't have time for the news? Like, I don't know. That's
Yeah, was this
thought
like
that came to
was this like everybody shuts their business down and like goes to like is this like an event?
It's like the guys that aren't with the gossip and stuff, the guys that are like, tell me how it ends, I don't know.
Yeah.
Could have been some of that.
Or the Essenes that are out in the desert that are
Yeah.
like
Writing their scrolls.
Yeah, they're just continually writing and they're like, I don't know what happened.
It is quite a thought.
It is.
No, that's a good point. There could have been people who were like not paying attention or like, I'm going to take a wait and see approach if this guy is legit or not.
Yeah.
Like, just,
Could be completely wrong about that too. Everybody could have been like,
I bet it was a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
I bet you had all of those groups in there. So what we're going to do in this series, we're going to take a look at the book of Mark out of the 4 Gospels. We're going to focus in on that and see how Mark did just that, how he shared the story of Jesus in a convincing way to his audience to show them who Jesus was, that he was the Messiah and that he was a new and better king. Really quickly before we do, though, I want to pause and recognize something. The death and resurrection of Jesus Christ is very real. It's a very significant and a very weighty topic, like we just kind of touched on now. And it quite literally changed the course of history and all of our eternities. That's why I asked those questions. I wanted to get us to stop and think about the emotion behind Christ's gift of salvation and just what it means to each and every one of us. I don't want to make the story of Easter just a dry academic topic and strip it of the very real significance that it has in our lives. So with that in mind, we're going to dive into the Bible and take a look at the story leading up to Jesus and just what exactly Mark was up to and how and why he told the story that he did. So first up, why did we even need a Messiah? Why did God have to send Jesus in the first place? And what did he accomplish through dying? And a big question I have is, God, could you have done it another way? Because like we were talking about, that's pretty gruesome, the way that it happened. So to work our way up to Jesus, we're going to start back in my favorite spot, the beginning. So we're gonna journey back
Didn't
to
see
Genesis.
that one coming at all.
You have notes. You cheated. We're going to head back to Genesis. Specifically, I'm going to go back to Genesis 3, and we're looking at, this is after Adam and Eve partook of the fruit that they weren't supposed to eat. God comes on the scene, is asking him what's going on. And this is God talking to Adam. It says in chapter 3, verse 17, it says, to Adam, he said, that's God, because you listened to your wife and ate fruit from the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat from it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil, you will eat food from it all the days of your life. And then jumping down to verse 27, it says, so the Lord banished him from the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he had been taken. So this is the very start of the reason why Jesus had to come. We have no clue from the story of Genesis how long Adam and Eve were in the garden before this happened. I mean, if you just kind of read it literally, it seems like not that long, but who knows? We have no clue how long they lived. I mean, well, it does tell us later on how long Adam lived, but we have no clue how many years it took to get to this point. It could have been hundreds for all we know. But this is the moment where it tells us that sin entered in. And this moment right here, it starts a pattern, a very clear pattern that we see. If you think about the very next story in the Bible, anyone know who comes on the scene right after Adam and Eve?
Cain and Abel.
Cain and Abel. And what happens with them?
First death in the Bible.
First death in the Bible. First act of violence in the Bible. Actually, that's not true. Because God...
Oh, no, he killed an animal.
Yeah, God killed an animal to
First
cover...
human death in
Yes.
the Bible.
Yes. So first human death in the Bible. So we have Cain kill his brother Abel. And after he does, so God had banished Adam and Eve to outside of the garden. That's where they had started their family. In that setting, Cain killed his brother Abel. And then God tells Cain in Genesis 4, he says, oh, wait. God didn't say this. Cain says, after God tells him he's going to banish him out into the nether regions, I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. And in reply, God says, not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over. So fast forward, Cain goes off. He has his own line of family. A couple generations later, he has a descendant named Lamech. Lamech, just to up it a couple of notches,
Guys, he's a savage.
to put it lightly, somebody does something to make him mad. So he didn't even like hurt an ox, kill an ox, like hurt a family member, whatever. He
Grumpy.
just insulted him. And Lamech says, if Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. And from there, it just spirals downhill, increased violence, until we get to Noah. And what was Noah kind of in the story at this point? What did God do?
He was the righteous one.
He found him to be righteous. So what did God do with Noah?
Made him a remnant.
Yep. He set him and his family aside, and it's kind of like, we're going to hit reset on this whole creation thing, and I'm going to flood everything and start it over. But as soon as that whole scene ends and they get off the boat, that cycle of sin starts over again. Noah gets drunk in his vineyard. Kind of sounds like the Garden of
Things
Eden.
happen.
Some weird stuff happens, and the cycle repeats. So we just see that like man left on his own is going to repeat these increasing cycles of violence. So God decides to do something different. He says, okay, I'm going to choose a particular family, and through them, I'm going to build a special relationship with them. I'm going to show them how to live, and through that, everyone else in the world is going to see what they're doing different, and that's going to draw them back to me. So that starts with the story of Abraham. God tells Abraham that he's going to create that family through his lineage. And he also tells Abraham that he's, like I was just saying, he's going to bring everyone back through him to God. If you remember the story of Abraham and his kids, what comes to mind? Were they a big, happy family? Or some stories that stuck out to you? It could be Abraham, his son Isaac. It could be Jacob.
Well, Jacob was the deceitful one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, think about
But they
Abraham.
didn't get along either. Him and Isaac didn't. And they were fighting for blessing.
That was Jacob and Esau, right?
Yeah.
You got like Abraham. He tries to pass his wife off as his sister to do that. And then you think Abraham was, counted as being faithful because one thing that he did really well is like God would tell him, leave your family, leave your homeland and go. And off he went.
Which was wild at that time.
Yeah, because you didn't have the same, like you couldn't FaceTime your family.
Yeah.
You didn't have any social network, which is really
There's
important.
like 4 or 5 generations living all in the same house. They would just like tack on over and
Yeah.
over and over again. And who knows how many people were there. Like it could have been 40, 50, 60, 100. Like
We don't
all
know.
living it. Like could have been a ton of people there. He's like, yeah, I'm going to need you to leave and go to a place that you don't know. None of your family's there. And I'm the actual God and you need to go do this. And he's like, what?
Yeah, because think, just like you left your little clan of however many families, whatever city you wander to, guess what? They're going to have their little clans and they're going to be looking at you like, who is this?
Yeah.
And I don't know about you guys, but anytime I get this little inkling that I think God's calling to me, the first thing I want to know is, how is it going to turn out?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no.
Can you give me step 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12?
All of
and
them,
more?
please. So Abraham, he tries to pass his wife off as his sister. Once God gives him that promise, what's the first thing he does? He goes back and tells his wife, and she schemes as like, well, I'm not going to have kids. Go sleep with my
Yeah.
servant. And that didn't go
There's a
well.
lot of trust issues going on here.
Then down to Isaac. I mean, we talked about counseling today. I think I need counseling if my dad tied me up.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was about to
Pin
sacrifice
me down
me.
with a knife over me.
Yeah.
And then,
Some imagery with Jesus there.
yeah.
Isaac.
Yeah. And then, Jacob being deceitful with his brother Esau. Like, the whole point of this is God says, okay, it's not working out with humanity, so I'm going to pick this one family. And then, like, just like that, it's like, oh, wait,
Yeah.
dang it, they're dysfunctional too.
So if
All
you
the
thought
way.
your family was messed up, just go read the families in the Bible.
Yeah, Genesis is a good read. It's a good read. And so then we work our way down to Joseph getting sold off into slavery, another dysfunctional piece of the family, into Egypt. They're there for 400 years. And then out of that, he raises Moses. And when he raises Moses and helps him to lead the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt, he makes a new promise with this new, the family is expanded quite a bit. And it's kind of like a new phase. So it moves from the covenant with Abraham to the covenant at Mount Sinai with the people. And Moses is their clear leader, right? And it looks like, is he going to be the guy to do the job? Is he going to be the guy that's going to help kind of restore things to what God had
By the way,
wanted
he
to
was
be?
jacked up too.
Yeah. He didn't do such a great job. But as Moses is kind of exiting from the story in Deuteronomy 18, he says this to the Israelites. He said, "The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your fellow Israelites. You must listen to him." And it says, and he just repeats that. So there's this promise to the Israelites that there's going to be a new Moses to come that's going to set things back on track. But fast forward through like the entire rest of the Old Testament, if you haven't read it, it doesn't go well. It's constant cycles of like, everyone's for God and they're like all on fire for him, and then give it a generation or two and they've turned away, and it gets like worse and worse and worse until something horrible comes, someone invades them, something bad happens, and then they repent and they turn back to God. And it just like rinse and repeat over and over again. So you kind of see this like small story that started in Genesis, and it just like crescendos throughout the entire Old Testament until the entire nation, it splits in two first, and then they get carried off into exile. And that ends up being like a really, really traumatic experience for them, as I think we could all imagine. And one of the prophets kind of talking about the situation that they're in is prophesying about their situation, but us having the viewpoint of looking back can tie a lot of the prophecies to Jesus. In Isaiah 53, it says, "Because he poured out his life unto death and was numbered with the transgressors, for he bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressors." So you see words like he poured out his life unto death. he was counted as one of the sinners, right? So there's already this kind of like foreshadowing. The prophets are talking about this figure that's going to come. And the Israelites throughout their history know that there's this new Moses that's supposed to show up. But where is he? So the Israelites come back from exile in Babylon. They're there for a couple hundred years. Then the Romans come in and take over. Why do you think God chose to step into the story of humanity the way he did with Jesus and at that timing? And just to throw it out there, like, we don't know. But just to pose the question, like, what do you think?
Brandon told me there's not a right answer, so I'm not answering.
What?
I think what's interesting about this is that this isn't the first time that God steps in.
Correct.
Like even back in Genesis with the Abraham story, if you go through anything about covenant theology, you're supposed to like walk through the path of the half animals and you're supposed to each walk through it. And he actually put Abraham to sleep and walk through it on his behalf because he knew that humans would never ever be able to live up to it. And he's like, because what would happen is if you did, this is symbolized, and if you mess up this covenant, you get put to death.
Yep, you die.
And he's like, I know you can't do that, so I'm going to walk through it for you, which is, I think, really cool because essentially that's what ends up happening. That's then repeated again in Exodus. And to our listeners, I apologize if there's a lot of Exodus references. I'm doing Exodus study in a year, so just get used to it, I guess. But I'm in chapter 6 right now, and it's God's promising to take action. And he says, basically, the leaders of your people have messed you up, and they did not lead you well. Therefore, I will do this, and I will do this, and I will do this. And he's like, because the humans couldn't do it. We are incapable of leading people well, unfortunately, just given what's here, with sin. And so there is this repeated effort, I think, throughout the Old Testament of God having to step into these times. To answer your specific question, why he did it with Jesus at that specific time, I don't know. That's my answer. I don't know. Like
But you got your Exodus plug-in, so good job.
I can't come up with like my mind's logical, and so I'm like, what's the logical answer that like why he would pick
That's
that?
because
time?
when the BC calendar wound down to 0,
That was pretty.
that's when it was.
Yeah,
They didn't even
that's
see it
when
coming.
it switched.
Yep.
The calendar said so, duh.
But yeah, like why? Why did he? Because there's the years of silence too. Like why? Why so?
Those
long?
were the years after the exile.
Yeah, like why so long?
I don't know. And I throw that out there, not to throw out a question, expecting an answer and be like, oh, hey, that didn't work. But just to get everyone to think about it. Like,
I mean, I wonder too if like at the time with Rome, that was meant to be like the pinnacle of what man could create with government and like man-made rules and systems. So, I mean, it seems like it would be the perfect time to reveal that upside down kingdom. This is what you think is like the best you can do. Let me show you and just flip that up for you.
yeah. I like that.
Now my mind's thinking of like the whole introduction of Hellenism.
Which we're not going to have time to get into today. But to simplify that, like it was a big shift in culture and mindset, which we'll touch on a little bit later. Mm-hmm. So it was encroaching that and shaking some things up. So yeah,
if you don't know what Hellenism is, go look it up. It's basically what we live like today.
Yeah, it's basically a shift from an Eastern culture mindset to how our culture
they're
operates
like, we can
today.
control you with these types of things without that. And
well, now you got me on a rabbit trail. The biggest point of Hellenism was, up until that point, Judaism, the surrounding cultures, like things were focused on God, a God, not necessarily the God of the Bible, a God as a center. And humans lived for the purpose of that God or those gods. Hellenism shifted to man is the highest being and you live for yourself.
Pleasure.
Yeah. And the gods of like Greek mythology kind of served man. So it was a shift from God being the center to man being the center. That's a whole nother interesting.
Quick Hellenism study.
So anyways, at the time of Jesus coming onto the scene, they were Israelites were back from exile, but they were under the thumb of Rome. They were taxed heavily. They were losing their ancestral land. It kind of brought back the painful memories of exile, except for they weren't in exile anymore. They were at home, and this was happening to them. So if you picture about that in our own context, I won't say a country and create controversy, but pick an enemy country in your mind. And if you imagine that they started marching down your streets and taking your property, your family away from you, how would you feel?
Violated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, that's the word that comes to mind, is violated.
Probably a little scared. Probably some shock there, I'd say. Like, what?
And in a very real sense, like, they would quote unquote want a savior, right? They'd want someone who could come in and deliver them from that. So there was this big mindset of the Messiah being this military leader that was going to come in and overthrow Rome. So when there was the talk of that, that's what they kind of envisioned that he was going to be. But that's not the savior that they ended up getting. So to kind of tie this up and keep the story going on, Jesus, if you think about it, the whole story, he was kind of the culmination of everything that had been happening in the Old Testament. We saw this cycle of man rebelling against God and turning back. God would intervene, but it never got better. And there was just this need for something to happen to change the course of that. And so sin entered in at the very beginning. Man fell. We saw those repeated cycles. We saw some good guys like Moses and King David show up, but in the end, they were flawed. So we needed this better priest who could intercede on behalf of mankind once and for all and break the power of sin. And that was what God did through Jesus. He came down into earth in the flesh to help where man could not on his own. So if you're a Christian listening to this and you grew up going to church, you probably heard a lot of this background before. But we also have the benefit of 2,000 years of history to see the spread of Christianity to reinforce our beliefs. But like we talked about earlier, what would the people who were witnessing this or hearing about this in real time think? Would they really believe that he was the Son of God that had come to rescue them from slavery and sin? And that's what the gospel set out to do. Their goal is to tell that story of Jesus far and wide so that others can come in to believe him. So now that we brought up the topic of the gospels, how many of them are there in the Bible? This should be an easy question.
4.
4. There's 4 gospels, but why do you think there's 4 and not 1 or 10, for example?
Obviously different perspectives, but I think maybe written, given that they are written to different groups of people intentionally.
Yeah.
One is to Jews, one's more to the Roman culture. I don't know. That's my initial thought.
Yeah, different authors, different perspectives, different audiences. And one of the reasons for that, like Billy alluded to, is that these stories weren't just meant to be historical recordings of what happened. They were specifically trying to tell a story to a specific group of people to convince them that Jesus was the Christ, that he was the Messiah that the Lord had sent. So I promised that we were going to talk about the Gospel of Mark. We're going to finally get to it here at the very end of this first episode to talk about who was Mark's audience and what was the story he was telling. So his audience was very definitely a Roman audience. If you ever read through all 4 Gospels, this one's the shortest. It's probably the easiest one for you to read because it's written in the same style that we're used today. If you try going through the Old Testament, one of the reasons why you probably get lost in it is their style of telling you something is very different from what we're used to. This is very clear cut, dry, action packed. It keeps the story flowing, so like we can relate to that.
Yeah.
It gives us what we want. Just tell me why. Just tell me why, right? And so he's telling the story of Jesus to an audience like that. Before we dive into what he's telling them, what even is a gospel?
The euangelion. I just love that word.
Euangelion.
It's the good news.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Do you want?
Yeah.
Duh.
Do you want like the in-depth answer?
Well, I'm gonna get to. You can jump in too. What do you got?
I was just to say every king came in with one.
Yes.
They had a good news that they would bring. This was like their edict that they would give to all of the people. This is what would happen, and there would be a person that would come on and be like,
Hear
"Here's-"
ye, hear ye.
Yeah, that's what I
okay.
picture. Somebody like putting a box down, and be like, "Hey guys, here's the good news. Here's what this king is all about." It's kind of like when we get a new president and they
Tell you all the things they're
all
gonna
the
do.
things they're going to do. However, in their society, the king was actually supposed to be the one that upheld that the most. So they were supposed to be the ideal person of their own good news. And as we've seen throughout the Bible, kings did not do that. So
Yes. So this is a very, I think it started in Greece and spread to Rome, this whole idea of a euangelion. So every time there was a new king, or in this area of time, a new Caesar, their euangelion would get proclaimed around the whole empire. So I want to read a snippet from one of them because I think you'll find it very interesting. So this is a quote from the Euangelion of Augustus Caesar. It says, "Providence has ordered all things and set them in order by giving us Caesar Augustus, whom she has filled with virtue that he might benefit all humanity, and has sent him as a savior for us and our descendants, that he might end war and bring order to all things. The birthday of the God was the beginning of the good news for the world." Let me read you Mark 1:1. "The beginning of the good news are euangelion about Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God." So if you're living back in this time, whether you're a Jew or you're a Roman citizen, if you read something that says the beginning of the good news about so-and-so, and it's not Caesar, they're going to be like, huh?
Yeah. Interesting.
Like, who is this? That's what we're going to look at in this series, that Mark is telling a story to a Roman audience about Jesus, this new king, and his job is to convince them that that's really who Jesus is. So in the upcoming episodes, we're going to look at that story, and we're going to compare it a little bit to Matthew and Luke, not John, to see where maybe they compare and contrast. But we're also going to look at the reasons for that difference. We're going to look at some scholarly work by a gentleman named Thomas E. Schmidt. What he did was he went and mapped out the coronation ceremony of a Caesar and compares it to the crucifixion story that Mark tells of Jesus.
Oh,
wow. So we're going to get to see how those line up and see what Mark was crafting in his story and kind of get a different take on the Bible. And I think this is really cool because if you just read through this stuff, you have no clue that all this stuff is hidden there.
yeah, peeling back the layers. I think it's so cool, just even at a high level of the contrast of, you think when you announce a king, he's this like new person who's going to be with you and doing all this stuff. Yet the one that Mark tells is this king, but he's about to, like, he's going to die. He's not coming into power. He's dying.
Yeah.
Just that contrast alone is like, huh?
Challenges what you think, that's why I said, I was asking earlier, like, if you heard the story of Jesus without witnessing it, and you heard like he was hung on a cross, and you're like, whoa, where is he today?
Yeah.
Like, that's not a very convincing argument.
Sounds like he didn't save you.
Yeah. So That's what we're going to dive into over the next couple of episodes and look at that. I hope you guys will enjoy it. But I just wanted to ask everyone out there in the audience what you thought of today's episode. Was all this Bible stuff we brought up something you already knew? Or was there anything new for you in there that you had never heard before? Did you ever think about that maybe the authors of the Bible weren't just recording history, but that they had a story that they were telling, that they had an agenda? I mean, if you think about it, when we tell stories, we kind of do the same thing, right? We have something we're wanting to tell. So I'd like to encourage everyone out there listening between now and the next episode to read through the book of Mark once, maybe even twice. Kind of take notice of what things stand out to you about the story of Jesus' crucifixion, and what questions does it raise in light of what we talked about at the end here today, or maybe even the Old Testament stuff. And if you do come up with any questions that you're wondering about, we'd love to hear from you. Drop them in the comment section so we can engage with you on this journey through Mark. Well, thank you everyone for listening. We're so grateful for having you tune in. Join us again next time as we begin the journey through Jesus' path to the cross that leads to his coronation. Thanks, guys.